Hey, my name is Jason Stansberry. I'm about to show you a little introduction to After Effects, a little bit on how it works and how you can use it and how awesome it is. So let me get that going. And I already have a Photoshop file open so I can demonstrate how After Effects can bring in those kind of files with multiple layers. So this is After Effects, but I kind of want to show you how After Effects works within your Windows or OS. So I've got a week 3 folder in here, and I've got some files out here that are explaining some things, but the way I set up my After Effects files are, I have my After Effects files out in the open, say within a folder. This is week 3, how After Effects works. So I keep everything in this folder for this one project. So this week is like a project. And I have an After Effects file that's out in the open, and the way After Effects works is it looks at files wherever they are, wherever they live. So you could have files all over your computer, which I don't recommend. I recommend keeping them pretty nice and neat and clean. So I keep everything into a footage folder. This could get a little more complex if you need to, but generically keep it in one folder. So if I look inside that folder, these are all the files I'm going to show you guys today, and that's what's being used within this After Effects file. And if you notice, it's a pretty small file. So they're pretty easy to handle. And if you did want to take this file, say from a class or to a different place of business, or to somebody's house to show them what you've been doing, you don't just take this one file. You need to take this file and whatever files you brought into the program, which I have in this folder. So you need to encase it into a folder, which would be this folder for me, week 3, how to do it. So everything is in this folder right here within this structure. Got the file, got it pointed to the footage folder, which is all the files that are going to be used. So if I wanted to take this somewhere, I need to take this whole folder as is. And if you look, it's only 19 megabytes as of yet. So that's pretty important. After Effects will look for a file, and if it's missing, you can go pick and show them where it is. But this is the program right here. Just like most programs, you have a file, and you can do a save as, you can close, you can import, you can do a lot of pretty much from any other program. Edit, you have different things in there, like the copy and the paste and all that good stuff. Duplicate, preferences back down here. I don't really mess with those too much. Composition, that's getting more into the program. And what makes it different, you have stuff you can do to layers. You have effects. I know you guys want to jump into that. Animation, different ways to view things, such as rulers, guides, that kind of thing. Zooming in and out. These little areas around the program, they call them panels. If you right click, panel, 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 even over here. But it's kind of considered a window. So if you close one, you can find out if you remember the name of it, like character here, shows up under window, character here, and it's checked because it's visible. So for example, if I want to do audio, if you see it's visible but it's not active. So if I hit audio and you look over here, it'll become active and it'll be checked. So this is your workspace, and you could find everything you need from this window tab if something weird happens and you accidentally click and close something. That can be the case when you're starting a new program. But you can change your workspaces depending on what you're trying to do. If you do an animation, you can click the animation and it gives you mostly things for animating. Effects with video and like movie effects is kind of their effects setup. I usually create one just for myself, and then I name it. I create a new workspace once I arrange it. And I do want to arrange a little bit. Like my effects, I'm going to go back to the standard real quick. And you guys can do this too if you want to. My effects and presets were here, and I did drag them over here. And I'll show you how you could easily move them. See that little blue highlight? That's where it's going to go. And since the tab up here, I'm going to drag it and become a tab down there. This is where it should start. Like when you first open After Effects and you didn't mess with it, it's probably down here. And I don't have that much space on my screen, so I'm going to drag it all the way up here to be next to my effects. And if I can't see it, you have a little scroll bar that you can look at and move and check it out. And then I like my timeline to go all the way along the bottom. So I'm going to bring my paragraph up by my characters because it belongs together. Whenever I type something, I can adjust the paragraph, and it's all right here. Preview, I can consolidate and bring it up here too. Info, I don't really use that much. Okay, so I've got character and paragraph. I got my timeline going across. This big area right here is how you see things. And since I've got everything kind of set up the way I like it, I'm going to go to my workspace and create a new workspace. And I'm going to name it my name, Jason Stansbury. Hit OK. So if something messes up and I close something and do anything or move it, hide something by accident, I can always go back to Window, Workspace, and go back to my name, to my preset. Or I can go reset to standard or anything else. All panels, if something gets really lost and you're really screwed, you can always go to Window, Workspace, all panels. But it gets really crowded. I prefer to have dual screens, but screen capture, what are you gonna do? Okay, so let's kind of get into it. This is the project. If you've ever been in Premiere, you have like a project bin area that you can bring stuff into. This is where you bring it into it. Let's bring some stuff in. So how do you do that? Of course, you can come up here and do File Import, File. This is the one way you can do it. You can click it and hit Import. You could also, with your mouse over this area, double click and it just knows what you want to do. After Effects is pretty good at knowing what you want to do in certain points of this process. And you can pick something and you can load it in. So in here, you can bring in a lot of files in After Effects. This is a PSD. It comes with layers. It's a Photoshop file. And you got JPEGs. So I'm going to bring in JPEGs first. And you just hit Import, and there it is. Now you can mouse over this little window and you can move things over. But there's another way you could do it, is under the Escape button on your keypad. There's a little accent key right to the left of one. If you mouse over the area that you want and hit that little accent key, it'll do full screen. So if I move my mouse to the timeline and do that little key, just tap it once and then tap it again and it'll go back. Whatever your mouse is over, it'll do a full screen of that. So it's a way to really just get to your information very quickly. So why I say that is I want to just kind of adjust my project panel to where I can just see what I want to see. I'm going to make sure I can read some of my names. Type, I don't need the type. Size, I don't need the size. Only thing I want to see is my file path. So I'm going to get rid of all these things. You don't have to do this, but this is how I work. And there's a little dividing area right here. You see my mouse roll over it. I can drag that all the way along to the end, just so I have room and I could really see where this file lives. So I try to keep my stuff very organized, and I hope you guys can do that too. Whenever you get a job, people will love you for it. You're not just sending it to the desktop. So you can see your path on where everything is going. So I have it all the way down to my week 3 folder, and then the footage in After Effects. So this is really helpful. Hit that little button and it goes back to normal. Because I like to just see the names. If I want to see the path, I hit that little quick key and it'll show me everything. And it's just really helpful. And always name your work so you know what the hell's going on. Okay, so I have my How After Effects Works JPEG. I want to see it besides this little thumbnail. And this little thumbnail gives you little information, 1920, 1080, millions of colors. Now if I want to see it, there's a composition to see it, but you need to put it into a timeline somehow. I prefer to drag it down to the timeline. And you can't really tell, but by experience, it's lined up perfect and exact to the frame. And that's because I drug it down to this timeline. I'm going to delete it really quick and show you another way to do it. Well, let me explain one more thing. Since we drug this file down to this empty timeline, it created a new composition for us, whatever the name was of that JPEG. So After Effects is pretty cool about that. So now it gave us a composition, and that's this new icon. So we have a JPEG, and now we have a composition, just for dragging it down. And I can show you again how that worked. So I just deleted the comp. You can select your JPEG, drag it down to this empty timeline, and it created it for us. That's really cool. Luckily, this image is 1920 1080, which is exactly the kind of file size that we wanted. So that's the kind of size that it'll give you. So whatever your image is, if you drag it down there, that's what size the comp is going to be. And we'll get into that a little later. And I've got mine set to quarter resolution just to make sure it was going, my playback was going more accurate. And if you click on full, that's full resolution. And you have half, third, quarter. It gets worse. Depending on your system, you might want to turn it down if it's giving you some issues with playback. So this JPEG here, I drag it into my comp, and now we can see it in our composition. And just like any other thing you can drag, you can hit spacebar and play. After Effects is not a real-time playback program. So instead of hitting spacebar, I want you to try a more advanced thing and hit 0 on the number keypad. That is a more accurate playback. So that is with a JPEG. Now if we had a PSD, like in Photoshop, I switched over to Photoshop here. This is the same image, and this is how I worked in Photoshop. I have all my layers. Notice they're named pretty organized. So if I wanted to bring this PSD or Illustrator file with layers into After Effects, you can do that. So I'm going to double click. Here's my PSD. You can change it down here. And when I say change it is, you could just bring it in as is with no layers using footage. So footage is like almost like a film strip. There's no layered information in that film strip. It's just flat. So no matter how many layers it is, it's just going to come in flat. Of course, it has it around here. Merge layers. So it does look like a PSD. I'm going to drag it down here. I'm going to go ahead and delete this JPEG. It's the same thing. You can turn it on and off. but it's just flat. There's nothing we can do with it if we wanted to move the text around and things like that. So if you wanted to bring in a layered file, delete this, delete this. I can double click, go back to the same file. You can choose it here. Instead of footage, you can do composition. But After Effects has been getting smart about this. You can just click the file and hit import. It gives it to you again, another option. So you can do this little drop down and do composition. So if you look at that, inside the bin, it gave you a composition and a folder. And within that folder is all the layers. We can do our little trick and we can toggle this full screen. And if you look at this, it's the file name, how After Effects Works PSD, After Effects Works PSD, and the name of the layers at the beginning. Cat, color, create, effects, gradient. And it all says where it is. And since it's the same exact name, it gave me a number 2. So it doesn't like the same name, even though you can have same names. But in order to look at this, because right now this After Effects Works is empty, this one has this file contained in it that is the PSD with multiple layers. So I'm going to double click this. Pop opens this new tab. And if we can kind of select this little middle area and drag it up, and we can see all the layers. Nothing's animated. All the layers that are within this PSD file. So if we want to just select some, now everything is adjustable, which is very helpful, especially when you need to change some things. There's usually an art director or a manager or somebody, or the client wanting to change the logo. So if you look at this, I named it, I know exactly where it is. I can move that thing, I can turn it off. So PSD files can be brought in, Illustrator files can be brought in. It's a very cool feature within After Effects. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm actually going to start fresh again. So we can see another thing that I like to point out. So I'm going to double click and import some files. I'm going to import the first JPEG. And I'm not going to create a composition yet. But how do you create a composition? You could drag your image down here, but if it's the wrong size, it will be the wrong size comp. Now I say wrong size to say what is the right size. You can come down here to this little button just like Photoshop has on the layer palette. You have a create a new composition. You can throw it away and create a folder. You can interpret footage. But we want to create a new timeline, a new composition. So I can click that and it gives you this little pop-up box. And mine's set to frames. I'm going to do something really quick. Yours will probably look like that. I control clicked the numbers. I meant to reset that. But if you go down here, create new, it should look like this with a time code. So let's take a look at this little box. You can pick a name, whatever you want it to be. I'm just going to leave it as default. There are presets here. You can pick a preset. I don't really mess with the preset because I know the size that I want, and the size that I want is 1920 by 1080. That's a pretty basic HD aspect ratio. And if your computer is a little slow, you might want to do 1280 by 720. But most likely do 1920 1080 because that's the pretty standard that's going on right now. And the next big thing is 4K, but the computers just really can't mess with it. So 1080, you might hear that number when you're looking for TVs and that kind of thing. But 1920, 1080. When I design stuff for Photoshop and I want to bring it into After Effects, I do 1920, 1080 pixels within Photoshop and in After Effects. And your frame rate might be default at 29.97 and look like this. I just changed that frame rate to 30 because we're not doing film, we're actually going to digital, and I prefer just an even number because I work with a 3D program, and a 3D program just does even number frames, and that's just what I deal with, and most likely you will too. You could always convert it later after you finish your movie and adjust it from there. Square pixels, this is more for TV down here and go into film. We're not doing that. We're mostly digital, YouTube generation, Vimeo. Stick with square pixels. So resolution, this is what I showed you guys, excuse me, in the composition folder, or in the composition panel. Just leave it as default, it should be full. Time code, sometimes you can start at 1, or don't really mess with that, but if you're dealing with 3D people, sometimes they don't render the 0 frame. They start at 1. This is where you change that. You can match up frame numbers to 1 with them. And duration. So here's the tricky thing about duration. If you start with the 30-second duration and you build all of your project to 30-second duration, every new composition you do, which you most likely will create new compositions within your project, will be at this duration, which is fairly short. So if the client, you, get to the point where your animation goes beyond 30 seconds, you have to go to every single composition and change it to the new size, to the new duration. And it can be pretty tedious and it's agitating. So I'll give you a little tip. You want to go to like 5 minutes or so. That way, you're most likely going to be doing 30-second, a minute stuff, and 5 minutes is way long, and you can easily trim down your project, and it's way harder to trim it, not trim it, but to expand it longer. So if it's already long to begin with, and you trim it down, it's way easy. Good tip. And you got the background color, and that's going to show up back here from your timeline. It won't render, but that's your color. You can choose any color you want. Pretty basic, looks like Photoshop. You can color pick, and do all that stuff. But I like to work in frames, and I want to show you guys. I'm going to hit OK, and I'll show you how to change it. So here's my time. You can actually type this up. But if you control click this time and let go, it switches to frames. You still see your time down here. And if I want to go back to that window that we just hit OK with, if you're within the comp, and if you notice that this timeline is blue, it's highlighted blue around this whole thing because it's activated. If you look up here, it doesn't have a blue around the bin, but now it does. Now this does. So that's how you can know where you're active, where your mouse is active, and that kind of thing. So if I just scrub a little bit, make sure my timeline is selected, and hit Control K, that pops open this composition settings again. And notice that it reflects the frames up here. And 9,000 is pretty big for me. I'm going to go down to 2,000. Like I have better judgment in frames than in the time code. So if I go to the end, I can see it's around 1:06. Now if you plan on doing something longer than a minute, make sure that you can control click, look in here, and you can say 5 minutes or whatever it was. But to be safe, I'm going to do 2 minutes. And that's me just dragging over this timeline. Now, you can zoom up on this timeline to be more accurate. And then what I'm doing is I'm hitting the plus and the minus up by my backspace key on my keypad. And if you look down here, this thing moves. You can click this, or you can actually click and drag. And if you look up here, there's this little area that does this too. It's pretty cool. So that's the full duration, and I can zoom up. And if you take a look and see this, this says 0 seconds and 15 seconds. And if I click and zoom up, that 15 seconds jumps. It slowly moves to the right, but you can see these seconds becoming more accurate. So you see 2, 3, 4. If you want second by second, here we go. Here, it's at this level. So you have to zoom up to see this timeline a little more accurate. And you can actually just go within it. So you have 15th. So every 15th of a frame. And if you're doing an effect or like a little animation, I try to do it within like 1 to 2 seconds. Now some people, they'll see like some keyframes, but they'll do it over this whole piece. And it'll be like, say, 15 seconds instead of 15 frames. And it's super slow. So you got to be careful with your scale and looking in here. So how do you rename something? You can come up to your bin and name it directly. Hit the enter key, kind of like a Mac OS. If you select it and hit the enter key, it's kind of like programming. You can rename this. And then hit enter again. And you've got your renamed composition, and it reflects it down here. If you wanted to do another naming system, you can actually have this area activated, Control K, and you can name it up here also. I'm going to go back to frames. So this is empty until we drag this guy into the timeline. Good habit. Notice there's 2 colors. I would say drag everything down to this area. It lines it up perfectly. If you can drag it over to the composition, but it's all sloppy. I don't really recommend that. And of course, everybody can say, I can line it up just like that. And I think I just got lucky. But I don't think you guys can get lucky. You're going to have some little spaces leaking out, and that's just bad habits. Don't do that. Drag it down here, and it'll be perfect. That's what we kind of want to go for. We don't want bad habits. So what I'm doing here is, with the comma and the period, there's 2 little arrows on your keypad. You can do the left one, and it zooms away, and you can do the right one, it zooms up. And like Photoshop and Illustrator and most other programs, if you hit spacebar, most graphics programs, if you hit spacebar and click your mouse, you can use the hand tool and move around. And I'm holding down the spacebar this whole time. If you let go of the spacebar, then it goes back. But if you want to zoom up and look around, that's one way to do it. And I can zoom back out using those quick keys, and we're all good. Now, there's a little bit left over, and one way to kind of get it all back to a home base, you can use this little % sign and hit fit. And it fits it to this window. And as soon as you do this, it breaks that fit. You have to go do it again. But that's pretty cool. Alright, so we brought in this file. Now, organization. If I go look at my OS, I have my folder, this is my project. If I look inside of it, I have my After Effects file, and then I have a footage folder. Double click that, here's all my stuff. and I know exactly, you know, this is the After Effects file, this is the one I need to use. If I had multiple After Effects files and they're not the main one, I would put them somewhere. And that's a little more advanced, but I want to just know that this is the file I need to work with. Nothing in here. So I'll put all those files in a footage folder inside there. So I say that to say this is, you have your After Effects file, the one that we're going to, the timeline, the composition that we're going to be working with, because we're going to have multiple comps. We want to make sure that we keep this organized. So you can come in here and make a folder. I'm going to do footage folder. And I'm not going to do another one. I should do it anyway. Supporting comps. So we can have multiple, these little icons here called compositions and comps. You can have multiple ones. And anything that's not the main working edit, I'll put inside here. But all the images, the audio, anything like that, you want to drag into the footage folder. And I can go and adjust it by type, little tags, and have my main working edit, and it will look for footage inside my footage folder. If I have multiple compositions that are secondary to my main working edit, I put them in the supporting comps. But it's empty. But I usually have this in every file. So I'm going to import some other stuff. And notice if I drop this little window down and select my footage folder, that's where everything's going to go. So that's pretty cool. So I brought in my JPEGs, and now I'm going to bring in the Photoshop file. It has a flattened piece for now. So I can keep this nice and neat. I can double click that and it'll bring up my tab, which it's already brought up. Look in my footage folder, everything's nice and neat. We're good to go. So here's the base, and you can always drag other files into it. Remember, you can do this, which I don't recommend. You can drag it down here and it'll be perfectly lined up with your frame. Even if it's a smaller image, it'll line up to the center. You can have these different layers. Now if you look at these layers, you have eyeballs. Hopefully that's pretty common sense to where you can turn them off. And if you turn them all off, you see the background. And if you remember, Control K on your timeline, and you have your background color. So let's change that just to show you how you can do that. It's that easy. Please don't use that bright of red. You do a off color, nice cool gray, easy on the eyes. Black, you just go all the way down the bottom left. Make sure it's all the way down there. Hopefully you guys have worked with one of these. If you just click down here and it's not perfectly in that corner, the way this thing works is there's no color on this left edge. All the color is on the right edge. And the in-between makes it muddy and more gray. And of course, the lighter the colors on the top and the darker colors on the bottom. So if you think that this is black, yes, that does look black, but it does have red in it because there's red on this spectrum. And you're not totally here. This is no color value. This has more red in it, and this has more red in it. So you got to be careful. Don't just click and become like close. Good habit is to go all the way to that corner and make sure it's tucked deep. And you can look at the values here, zeros. You could just type it. And notice that's a G. We're working on the green. We got some red. But if you don't want anything, knock it all down to 0 and it puts it in that corner. That's the background. By habit, I just hit the save button. And that's a good habit to have. So you can go up here to File. See, the quick key is Control S. You can save as another name. I'm going to do a save. I'm going to call it lesson. Hit OK. So now up here we see that it's actually named and it's got a location. Everything is all good. So this is how the layers are going to work. We have the base layer, which it shows number 3. This layer is actually physically, not physically, but you know, it's on top. And we can't see what's underneath it. So it's kind of like Photoshop in this way with the layers. So anything on top is on top digitally inside the program. And another way you can do that is move it over a little bit. I'm using this Windows tool. I clicked on this layer, notice it's selected. That's how you can tell the computer like which one am I moving. You have to select it and then you use your tools. But if you, let me zoom out just a little bit. There's little brackets. If I move my mouse over my image that I have selected, and then I move over to this cat image, it's not selected, but if you look at those brackets, that's what the mouse is over. If I click and move, it knows that that's what I'm going to click and move. So you have to be mindful on not accidentally moving something. You can hit Control Z and get it back. So be careful if you move this, you don't want to move the cat, because if you mouse over and move it, it's going to move. But there's ways to lock it down. This little lock down here won't let me move the cat, but I'm actually moving what's underneath. Which, if you don't want to do that, you need to lock that too. And then you can only move the logo. And I always need to default back to this Move tool. So if you just want to move this, make sure that you lock everything else except for the one you want to move. And it's tedious, but it's kind of good to do when you're first starting off in After Effects, because so many times I thought I was done with the project and I would just try to click off of a layer. Like, how do you deselect this layer? Like, I would accidentally move something and I wouldn't know. Like, if this one was locked and this one's underneath. And then I go to finish the project and it's messed up. It's good habits to just take it slow and lock everything until you want to move something, and then you only move that thing. But I'm going to tell you a little trick on how to deselect. I always default back to this selection tool, which is the V tool on the keyboard. And I select in this gray area. And it was kind of a bad idea to select in here because you might accidentally move something. So if something is selected, I try to deselect down here in this negative space, or just somewhere in this timeline negative space. And that deselects this. Because there's an example with the type tool. If you type something, of course you can't see that. Let me go back to the Move tool. So here's my habit. Go back to the Move tool, then go to Type. I'm going to change the color so you can see what's going on. This is a little trick that you can get messed up in. So if you type something, let's pretend that you started. And I usually go back to the Move tool, which is the quick key, the V, right? It's just going to put a V in the type tool. So how do you deselect? You can come up here and select another tool, or you can click down here in this negative space. It's a good habit to try not to click up here to deselect something, because you can move it. I'm going to delete that guy. So be mindful about that. I'm going to turn these off so we can concentrate on this logo. And we do that with the eyeballs. I could come up here and select. Just be careful with that without trying to move something. I like to select down here on the timeline because that means nothing else will be messed up in here if I have multiple things going on. So if I know that my frame is 1920 1080, the actual source image, 1920 1080, because that's what I built it for. I'm very comfortable with that number. It'll become basic for you. And I know my composition is 1920 1080, which is this whole thing right here, the composition, the one we're working in. 1920 1080. My image is 1920 1080. There's a trick to realign everything. If you select your image, you right-click, transform, which is very similar to Photoshop and Illustrator. You have this fit to comp, which is really cool. It just fits it to the comp perfectly. Really neat. But your images and your composition needs to be the same size, or you're screwed. And you'll find out whenever you do that. But even if it is a different size, because if you do portrait pictures, for example, you can right-click the layer that you want to fit, transform. You can fit to the width or the height. And these are really neat to mess with. Okay, so we have several images. We drug them to the timeline. If something's on top, you can't see it. It works in order of whichever one's on top. So if I just click and drag, you see the little highlight to tell you where it's going to go. So that is now on top, and that's what's covering up what's on the bottom. Now, to know the attributes of this file, they have these little toggle down switches. You can click this little guy, and it has transform. If you click that little guy down, you have these different little properties. Position, I'm going to turn this off so we can see what's going on underneath it. Position is the same thing as using this move tool, but for some people you like to type in numbers. So you got all this ability to move this guy. And anchor point is this point in the center. You can always go back and reset it. You have scale, and you have rotation. So hopefully you guys know about some rotation degrees. Common ones are 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 180. And if you want to go 360, you can type in 360. But notice it gave a 0 and it's at a 1. Aftertext is pretty cool. So it assumes you probably want to do several 360s. This is one 360. This is two 360s. And then 3 and so on. So you don't have to go type in 3,000 whatever. You can just type in how many 360s you want. And you have your opacity, which turns it visible and invisible. Now, if you guys were looking at the history lesson, alpha channels, transparencies, this little checkerboard, if you click that, that looks like Photoshop. And that means that if we rendered this movie out as a movie with transparencies on it, or we can spit out one single image with the transparency, we will have a clear, transparent area where these checkerboards are, which is giving us alpha channel. So that's one thing to check to make sure that you're not going to render a black movie. You click this button and you can see it. See if there's a transparency or an alpha channel available for your image. But I can click this and do the opacity and you can see it going away. And the other cool thing about this is this is very similar to Photoshop. I could just do it freehand, click and move, and do this, which which I don't recommend doing freehand. You can do a transform by holding down Shift while I do this with my mouse. And if you hold down Control, you should do it from the center. And it's very similar to Photoshop. That's pretty tacky. Please don't distort your images like that. Hold down Shift and do it in a better way. Now, if you mess everything up, another way you can reset is if you look up here. Each layer has this, and you can hit reset, and it goes back to the true size and dimensions of the image that you brought in. Now, if you have an effect on it that does not affect the effects, you'd have to go turn off the effects and that kind of thing. All right, and all these are animatable. So that's what's really cool about After Effects. Like Photoshop, if you do all this and you hit enter, like you transform an image and you hit enter, you're screwed. That's just how it is. It re-rasterizes the pixels, and unless you use a smart object. But you're kind of stuck with this size. And After Effects, you can just go back, type it in, and you're good. You can always go back and change it, which is why I like After Effects. But you can totally animate with this thing. You could, this little stopwatch, you can roll over and you'll see what it means, what different things mean over here. But if you just click it once, that means you activated animation. You don't want to click it again. If you click it again, here's the keyframe. If you click this again, they all go away. So don't click that more than once. If you want to add a keyframe, it's this little button over here. And it's just adding keyframes. Of course, it's all the same value, so it's not going to move. But I want to show you that you could add all these keyframes. Or you can copy and paste, Control-C, Control-V. And you could do all this work. And if you forget, and you come over here and you click this stopwatch and you have all this work, it will just get rid of it. So be careful. You don't want to do that. But I want to activate my keyframes, move my timeline over, see where it says 100? I know that 100 frames, I should work within this area, so I need to zoom up. But to see what time it is, it's like 3 seconds. I'm going to zoom up, hit the home key, and I'm going to look up here and see 100. So that's not that far. But I want to show you a little quick animation. That's how easy animation is with After Effects. I just activated it once, moved my timeline over, adjusted the position. I'll do it again so you can see it. Made a little keyframe, moved my time down, moved it over, moved my time down. And you can just keep adjusting it. And if you want it to go back to this position, I know it's my beginning keyframe. I can Control-C, Control-V. Go back the way it came. Now there's different ways to preview it. I'm scrubbing my timeline with my mouse. I could hit spacebar, but I don't recommend spacebar. I recommend this way. If you move your cursor down here just a little bit, there, I'm going to zoom out. This little gray area, it says work area. You could drag this guy down and then hit 0, and it's going to preview what's inside this little area, and then it'll play back as real time as possible. And you can see information here under the preview panel. If it's not running smooth, it'll give you a warning saying it's not real time, but it's real time right now because we shortened our preview. That means the RAM is only going to use, your computer is only going to use information to render this little area. it's not going to render this other area. So that's really cool. And there's quick keys on how to make the end point be where you want and this other point to be where you want. And there's quick keys for this guy. Because if we want to adjust the keyframe, our cursor needs to be right over the mouse. Our mouse needs to be, and the cursor needs to be right over the keyframe. And I could eyeball it, but it's kind of hard to get lucky. When there's a much quicker way, you can hold down Shift and then scrub, and it will lock to the nearest keyframe or the nearest important piece. And you can adjust and overwrite this keyframe by adjusting it. So I'm holding down Shift to snap to a certain keyframe. Because if I go just right next to it and move it, it's actually creating another keyframe, and it'll look jacked. You don't want that. So use Shift to snap between different things. And if we want to preview this area, we want this end to jump to where my cursor is. Hit the letter B on the keyboard, as in boy, or beginning. Now I'm going to go to this last keyframe by holding Shift, and it'll snap to it. I'm going to hit the letter N, as in no. And of course I want it to be at the beginning, so I'm going to go all the way home. You can hit the home key and do that. Depending on where your cursor is, hit home, it'll jump to the beginning. I'm going to hit the letter B, and now I've queued up my my cue. So it's very easy to get used to that. And it's a time saver, and it's awesome, and you'll look like a pro. Somebody sees you doing that, they'll probably hire you. Yeah, right. And okay, so another good habit is right before I preview what I want to see. Say I did all this work, save. So when you get stuff ready and you're just about to look at it with the preview, save, and then hit preview. In case your computer crashes, you don't want to lose everything you just did. It could be like 2 hours worth of work, so you need to be able to save before you preview. Okay, we're not getting into animation quite yet, but I really wanted to show you guys that's how you can animate things. You just make your keyframes and you can adjust it all there. It's always adjustable. Really, really cool. And so those are your transform properties here. And you can always go up here. I'm selecting my layer. I'm going to right click my layer. Go to effects. Here's all the different effects you could use. All of it is animatable. None of it is something that you could just say, apply an effect and it'll be done and look awesome. That's not how it works. You do a lot of it by hand, and we'll get into a little bit of it later. We're going to do a logo animation towards middle to the end of this, and you should be rocking with some effects. So the ones I like to go to, the go-to effects that I go to are right-click effect. I'm going to do generate, and you can generate what? You can generate all this stuff, but circle and fill, grid, stroke. Those are a lot of the ones that I do. I'll show you fill. So I won't do fill right now. I'm going to do a circle. So notice what that just does, what that just did. So my After Effects layer, it was the purple one. The effect totally takes over what it looks like. So if I come up to this, you can see effects up here. I'm going to move over a little bit. So I got my project panel, got my effects to search, which is basically the same stuff in here, but it's already here, and you can search if you know what you're looking for, or you can just find it, generate circle. And when you apply an effect, there's controls to control your effect, and that's in this panel that I moved from over here back to here. So here's my circle effect that is on my layer. Now if we toggle down, we now have an effects toggle down. So when you toggle this down, it's a circle. Notice it's the same circle up here. Toggle that down again. We have the same effects up here as we do on our layer. So they're attached to our layer. I'll use my quick key to go to full frame. So it is the same thing that you see up in this other tab. So either way you can get to it. Because sometimes you're just doing animation and you want to see this kind of look, and you can adjust your effects without having to have all this space taken up. See, I can't even see what I'm doing. So they put it to where if you select your layer, this does not have any effects on it. So it has no effects. But I can keep it nice and neat, select the layer, and the effects will show up here. So if you're working with it and you click off and you click something else and you're saying, where did my effects go? The computer doesn't know what you want. You have to select the layer, and if the layer has an effect, then there it is. So let's check out circle just really quick. You have a radius, which you can adjust all here, and depending on your computer you can always turn it down if you need to make it faster, more responsive, so it won't crash. You have an edge, which I'll show you once I get, I'll go through it a little bit. So if you adjust your radius, the edge does not move. Thickness, you adjust your edge, it's like it works as a stroke. It does not change thickness, but when you get smaller and smaller, it looks thicker. You just got to mess with it, get your brain wrapped around it. Here you can actually adjust what you want. It's kind of exponential, has a little formula to it. Pretty cool. And you can feather, which is even awesomer. So if you want a sun, there's this little orb. Really cool stuff in here. And everything is animatable that has a keyframe. So you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. Go deep. You can invert it. All this cool stuff. This is a little different. We'll get into that later. But the effect, this type of effect, overwrites anything that's on this layer. It's still there. You can turn it on and off with this little thing, the little effects. So I'm going to delete that guy. And there's another one that I use a lot, generate fill, fills the color. That's basically all it does. And I'll show you how I use that fill a lot. So just really quick, let's check it out. There's one more thing in here. You have a thing called a solid. And you can right click in this negative area. You can go to new. And you can do new text from here. A new 3D camera, a new light, a solid. Solid is what I use a lot. I use it as a utility. I could name it utility here, but I just want to show you guys this and we can name it later. 1920 1080. If you had an odd size, you can just click this and it'll be whatever the size comp that you're putting it in. Of course, we want to keep it pixels square. I just want to keep it the size that my comp is. It usually defaults to a black or a white. I put it right in the middle because I use it as a utility. And I'll show you why. So I'm going to hit OK. It creates a folder and it puts it inside the comp that I was working in. So don't panic, everything is there. It just puts it on top. But I'm going to name it the bin utility. So notice it updated its name here. So what do I do with this guy? Whenever I want to make a shape or do anything, or say a color, I keep this at an ugly gray, 50% gray, because I can always put a fill on it. and it creates a color. And here's the other cool thing is it's only one of them, but you can come in here and hit Control D on a layer that's selected. I'll do it again. And I can always come in here to the fill, change the color. I moved it over so we can see both of them. So here's the cool thing is I've got two solids and it's only one true solid source. But I can drag it down in here, put an effect on it such as a fill or even a circle, anything. But you can duplicate it, and After Effects as a whole is still looking at this one piece of information. I can get rid of this guy, turn them off, and I have this thing. I could select this guy and hit Control D for duplicate and move it over. But it's still only one file inside the program. So you can do lots of duplicates and it's only coming from one file. So that's really, really cool. If I need multiple colors, multiple effects, I can apply them on a solid. Sometimes we'll get into that. But like, why would you want a solid? So I'll show you. I drag my little utility solid down here, and I can do an effect. I'm going to fill it. Actually, I'm going to do a circle, generate circle. So it takes over, the circle effects takes over my solid. So now it's a true circle. I'm going to make it big, but I want to make a vignette. See how this is dark on the edge? I can invert this guy. It's kind of like the Warner Brothers cartoon. I can put a feather on it. I can change the color. And that's how you make a vignette. That's pretty quick. And don't be afraid to crank it up, and like it's at 400, but you just kind of crank it up and make it look good. Don't go too ridiculous. Like, don't go past 800. Your computer might freak out. But you can adjust the radius and make it look good. You can turn it on and off, and you can see the difference. Actually, I need to turn on and off my layer. So it's the kind of stuff I do with my solids. And you can put a lot on it, and you can duplicate it, and it's still coming from one solid. So I'm going to get rid of that layer, go down to my utility, my solid, and I could have my vignette on there. I could have a whole bunch of stuff on there. I can create a lot of things from this utility. So for example, let's do that vignette one more time so I can show you my point. Go to my circle, and crank it up, and I'm going to invert it. I'm going to do a little feather. Actually, I want it like that. So if I put that over something, it'll be a vignette. So that's one thing. And I want to show you some naming tools. See, I have utility up here. That's what I want to name it. But you can name things independently from the bin to keep it organized inside your timeline. So if I just select my layer, my solid, hit enter, I can name this, say, vignette. And I can duplicate that. I'm going to turn off my vignette. I'm going to call this box. And I'm going to look at my layer, and you could come up here. Make sure my layer is selected that I want. I deselect, just a good habit. Select my box. You can select your effect and hit delete, and now we're back to my solid. It's just one way that I do it. You could just drag it back down and start again. But I duplicated it, deleted my effect. And you can come up here and you have these little drawing tools. You have the rectangle tool. You just click and drag. It's not perfect. If you click your alpha channel, you can see that it will be cutout of this bigger solid. And it gives you this little mask down here. I double clicked it and I can move it over. Or you can select different points and mess with that. One thing you gotta watch out for is, we'll get into this a little later, if you move it over, let's move it over a lot, double click and move the mask independently from the layer. Look at that. Since we moved the layer over and then moved the mask back over to the right, you see the edge of the solid. So that's a problem. And if you look down here, you have your mask, you have your different ways you can troubleshoot things. You can add the mask, you can subtract the mask, and that kind of shows you how far this solid is moved over. And that's why we had it cut off here. And you can intersect stuff, so it gets a really powerful tools in here for such a simple thing. You can feather the mask, you can expand the mask, you can shrink it on itself. This kind of stuff really helps for cutting things out. It's really cool, and you can turn it off. You can see how screwed up you were on your mask tools. So it's good to double click your mask and move it instead of just deselecting and moving it over. Okay, so we got our box. It's a little messed up. Go to transform and fit to comp. It's no longer a box because my mask is a little messed up. So if you're drawing, like Photoshop and Illustrator, I just held down Shift while I drew that. Now we have a box. I can find my utility again, drag it down to my layers. It's just a gray square for now, but I want to show you using multiple shapes. You just draw in here, click and hold. You can do an ellipse tool, hold down Shift so it looks clean. I mean, you can go pretty far. I was on the double click. Always default to the move tool. You can deselect in this little blank area. This stuff starts to act a little weird. You never know when you need a star. And you got this. I actually use this a lot when I'm having to replicate interfaces, things like that. Now if I look on this layer, toggle it down, we have a mask, little toggle, look at the mask toggle, and you can see they're color coded, and it's not the brightest colors, but you can change the color here. I'm going to the most brightest color at the corner and then changing the value so we can see the difference. I like that blue. Go with the green. And now you can see when I select my layer, when I deselect it, kind of can't see it, which is good for previews. Select your layer. You have your different masks that are selected, and by color you could definitely tell which one's which. You can come in here and name it if you want by hitting the Enter key, and you can just make it nicely organized. You might think that's a pain in the butt, but when you're working on projects, it's good to get in the habit of doing that. You could just keep it by color, it's a little faster, but it's really neat how you can stack shapes to become different things. I can create characters with this. It's pretty neat. You can get into it and you can go pretty deep. And I wanted to show you this option. I'm overlapping this to show you some different ways. Like, see, we just combine these shapes on top of another. With this selected, we can see they're all separate, independent shapes. But when you deselect, it becomes this thing, and you can totally stack things together to become a thing. It's kind of cool. You can make characters and whatever. But these little drop downs, if I get the star, because that's more noticeable for me, and I go to subtract, it's going to subtract out. And depending on what order it is, if I bring it to the top, or go down one, and then down one, it's still trying to subtract from what's underneath it, or from what's above it. So it's pretty cool. So all these are added to that solid, the utility, and the star, I'm saying subtract, punch out. So that's pretty cool. And that's what these things do. They do different things. And you can intersect. And if I look in here, it's still pretty, it's transparent. But you can get some interesting results out of that. And it's all out of the same utility, the same solid. And there's ways to, let me finish my mask demonstration. Let me show you. So I turn things off so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to call this thing. I don't know what it is. But this, I just drag it down again. Same thing, it's a solid. You got a pen tool. And this is just like Illustrator. You click and hold, and it gives you the handles to be a Bezier. You don't have to close it. You can leave it as is. If you toggle down, you can look at your masks. Same thing. Since it's not closed, you don't have that option to do anything with it. I could keep that there. It's not going to do anything. I could delete it. You could actually start to draw a character if you wanted to. Get a funky head. But you could actually click these points and start messing with it like Illustrator. Pretty cool. If you were a cartoonist or like anime, which I think some of you do, you could draw your characters from Illustrator Photoshop, or you can kind of do it in here. It'd be interesting to do it all in here, and it'd be totally editable. But you have a head. And just to be thorough, I can add, ooh, I accidentally clicked it. Now I'm going to show you. If you click up here, you can see the true source name, which is all utility. But if you click here, that's the stuff we renamed. And that's the way, if you accidentally click it, that's how you can tell what the name is. But under my head, I've drew a circle for some eyeballs. And since both are add, I'm going to subtract. There you go. Pretty cool stuff with the masks. Alright. Turn my opacity off. And of course, you can type. Now, I always default to my move tool, especially after the type tool. So you can adjust stuff, but if nothing's selected, you're not going to get anything out of it. So you have to make sure your text is selected. And under character, which is this right here, you got your fonts. You have your different weights. and you have your sides. Now, depending on what you're doing, you might want it to size from the middle or the left and right justified. Left justified is from the left. Right justified is from the right. If you're doing a title, it's usually from the center. And just like After Effects, just like Photoshop and Illustrator, you have align tools. And I'm just going to put it right back up here. And with the align tools, make sure that your layer is selected and you can align to the center and top and bottom. This is really helpful, really cool. You can align to a selection if you have multiples. For example, you can select all of it, go to your align, and wherever the line is, it's going to adjust left or right. They're about the same size. And you can distribute evenly too. So if you select all of them, and depending on where this bottom one and the top one is, it's going to center this one right in the center by this tool here. So it's really helpful. That's kind of up on the top a little bit. You want to give some breathing room, and you get pretty good breathing room down here. And you just want to distribute. There you go. So you got some pretty cool tools in After Effects, and hopefully you know where you can get your effects from. And we're going to dive into this more and more each week. So hopefully we can do this and be comfortable with it. And one quick thing, I'm noticing that I didn't say set clip points. So before I let you go, I got another thing to show you. So whenever you drag any kind of clip in here, image, video, whatever, it still treats it as one thing. You have a beginning and you have an end. In the beginning, you can click and drag that little edge. And when you do, the beginning is an end point and the end is an end point or an out point. And you can trim those. And I'd like to show you how to do that in a pretty easy, convenient way. So you can sort of similar to the B and the N whenever we do this little work area. So B and N for the work area. If we want to make our clip, our actual layer, match this, if you hold down Alt, open bracket, and come down to this side and hit Alt, close bracket, that trims our clip. So if we go back to the beginning, it goes black. So the clip is only showing up wherever we trimmed it. You could do it manually. Yeah, you can do that. You can try to match it up to a cursor. You can still click and drag and then hold down Shift and it will snap to your cursor. That's one way to do it. But a super fast way is to move your cursor wherever you want. Make sure your layer is selected. Alt, open bracket, Alt, close bracket. It's a really, really quick way to do stuff. And then you can click and move your cursor and move your clip wherever you want on the timeline. You could click and move it to the cursor. Say you want it to start on 50. You could come in here and type in 50. You can eyeball it, hope you get it, right? Or you could hold down Shift and it'll snap to it, to the cursor. So if I want 100, make sure it's 100. Click and drag and hold down Shift and it'll just snap to my cursor. Now another way to do that is you hit no other key except open bracket, jump wherever your cursor is. Really, really cool, fast way to work. I wish Premiere had an option to do that. I assume they're going to do it pretty soon because it's very convenient. If you have an endpoint that you want, say it has to definitely end at 300, you hit the close bracket and it'll jump to the end of the clip, no matter how short the clip is. It works. So that is very, very cool. And say I want it to last the whole clip again, like the whole composition. So I can hit the end key, make sure I select my clip, Alt, close bracket, hit the home key, Alt, open bracket, and now guaranteed that I've filled my whole composition with this clip. And there's this thing called pre-composing and nesting. That's a big one. That one's awesome. That is what pretty much the optical printer, and with all that history lessons that you may or may not have watched, but to pre-compose something, it's as easy as this. You can take a layer and you can do this action called pre-compose. And what pre-compose does is it makes a comp the same size as your whatever you have selected. It can be multiple things. Let me do this. So if I pre-compose this, you have to select what you want. And I hit pre-compose. It's going to create a whole new composition and replace, like put all these into a composition and then keep the composition so we can keep and continue to work with it. So I'll show you really quick. And I want to make sure that it's moving all attributes. If you have effects and things, it's a good habit to just keep this, even if this is available, move it to move all attributes to the new composition. So what it did was it put everything into this comp, which is pretty cool when we get to use it. Now, where is all of our stuff? If we look up here, our footage didn't move. That's good because it's in the same space. But we got a pre-comp example and it added it to the open. And that's why we have this folder here. So we can be organized and know that we're just working with this, which is what we're in. We have this pre-comp example, which if we double click it, it should open a new tab. And here's all of our stuff. And we'll go through the workflow of that later and why you'd want to do this. But this is a really important part of how After Effects works. And it's really cool because you can put effects on this thing. If you ever worked in that Photoshop and you did a smart object, it kind of works the same way. I think they got the smart object from After Effects. But here's one way to show you. I'm going to do a fast blur. I had nothing selected, so I need to drag the effect to my layer. So I can blur this. So in Photoshop, traditionally, you can't go back. Well, I can. I can totally go back and change it. I can animate it. I can do a lot of things with this. Now, if I wanted to change this image, usually you'd have to go in, if this worked like Photoshop, you'd have to go into your bin, bring back the same image, readjust it, and then reapply it. But with this pre-comp, the effect is on the pre-comp, not on our footage at all. So see, we have this. I'll turn off this effect. Look at this screen. It's the After Effects screen. I'm going to put on my blur. And I'm going to change my image. And then come back to this effect. So the blur is on this pre-comp, not on the image. So we can change the image to whatever we want. And it would be blurred. really, really cool. And that's the beauty of After Effects. It's non-destructive. Unless you do something really crazy and get lost, but that's what's good. That's how you learn. All right, and I got a movie to kind of demonstrate what this does. We'll check it out. So this is After Effects. You can put a pre-composed a source file, and what that does is it kind of pushes it back, and then you can put an effect on this thing on the pre-comp. You can do whatever you want to it, color it, blur it, and you can still update your source from a pre-comp. And that's kind of what I did just now. So if you change your image, it'll update all the way through. And you can update it again, and it'll still work. And that's getting your brain wrapped around this. If you're a coder, it works like a node, and that's what it's called. Nuke and Flame, those are all high-end compositing software, and they work with nodes. And After Effects can do that. I just don't like to work in that kind of view. And it would be called Flowchart in After Effects. And nothing is showing up. I don't have that many nodes working together to truly show up as a flowchart. And this is like the worst example of it too, because it's all the way down here. But we're not Nuke and we're not a Flame, so I don't work with that kind of workflow. I do it all with pre-composing within this timeline, and that's how this program is truly made. You really have to go out of your way to be the workflow, which is the flow chart. And I don't really mess with that. So we're not going to learn it. Okay. So I think that's pretty much it. Practice. I'm going to have these files out there for a zip, in a zip, so you can mess with them and play with them and see what's up. So get ready for the next lesson. See you guys.